The afternoon sun bathed the suburban street in a deceptively warm glow, its golden rays glinting off the white picket fence that framed the Caldwell family's front yard. 9-year-old Sophie, her auburn curls bouncing with every skip, twirled through the grass, her giggles a melody against the soft hum of a spring breeze. To her grandfather, Walter Caldwell, watching from the porch with a steaming mug of black coffee, this was paradise, a fleeting moment of peace in a world he knew too well could turn cruel. A retired IRS investigator, Walter had spent 30 years dismantling empires of lies, his steely gaze piercing through the slickest frauds. Now, his only mission was to protect Sophie's joy, to let her childhood bloom unscarred. But in one shattering moment, that mission would ignite a firestorm. They came without warning, two men in crisp, dark suits, their polished shoes slicing through the tranquility like knives. Their badges, pinned to their chests, gleamed with a menacing sheen, and their eyes carried the cold arrogance of men who believed they owned the ground they walked on. They claimed to be HOA enforcers, guardians of the neighborhood's pristine order, but Walter's gut screamed otherwise. He'd seen their kind before, predators cloaked in bureaucracy, thriving on fear. As they stormed through the gate, the air thickened, the warmth of the day replaced by a chilling dread. "Is this child authorized to be here?" the taller man snapped, his voice sharp as a whip. Sophie froze mid-twirl, her laughter snuffed out, her wide eyes darting to her grandfather. The question was absurd, a grotesque invasion of a child's right to play in her own yard. Walter's fingers tightened around his mug, his pulse hammering. Before he could speak, the second man, shorter but meaner, lunged forward. His hand shot out, clamping onto Sophie's delicate wrist with a grip that made her cry out, a small, piercing sound that tore through Walter like shrapnel. The man's sneer, smug and unyielding, was a declaration of power he assumed was untouchable. Time slowed, each detail searing into Walter's mind: Sophie's trembling lips, the glint of that fake badge, the audacity of these strangers defiling his home. Rage surged through him, a molten tide forged from decades of battling liars and cheats. He wasn't just a grandfather, he was a warrior who'd toppled giants in boardrooms and courtrooms. And now, these impostors had crossed a line no man could forgive. He rose, his broad shoulders casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the yard. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was war. "Let her go," Walter growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated with the weight of a man who never backed down. The men turned, their smirks faltering for a split second. The one holding Sophie tightened his grip, a challenge in his eyes, before shoving her toward the grass with a dismissive flick. "Mind your place, old man," he spat, his tone laced with venom. But Walter saw the crack in their armor, the fleeting glance between them, the nervous shift in their stance. They'd mistaken him for prey, and that was their fatal error. He stepped off the porch, each stride a thunderclap of intent. His voice cut through the air like a blade. "Those badges? They're as fake as your courage. You're not enforcers. You're trespassers, and you just touched my granddaughter." The taller man scoffed, reaching for his pocket, perhaps a phone, perhaps a bluff, but Walter was lightning. In a blur, he seized the man's arm, twisting it behind his back with a precision honed by years of restraint and resolve. The shorter man charged, but Walter was a step ahead, sidestepping and wrenching his arm into a lock that drew a sharp yelp. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, spilled onto their lawns, their gasps a chorus to the unfolding drama. "You thought you could bully us?" Walter roared, his voice shaking the very air. "You thought you could scare a child and walk away?" Sophie, tears streaming down her cheeks, scrambled to the porch, her small frame trembling as she watched her grandfather become a force of vengeance. The men struggled, their curses mingling with panicked claims of authority, but Walter's grip was iron. He marched them down the street, their polished facades crumbling with every scuffed step, their humiliation laid bare for all to see. Whispers spread like wildfire. Had the HOA gone too far? Were these men even who they claimed to be? The community center loomed ahead, its doors open to the annual HOA meeting, a perfect stage for this reckoning. Walter burst in, dragging the men like fallen tyrants, their suits wrinkled, their faces flushed with shock. The room, buzzing with talk of mailbox regulations and lawn care, fell deathly silent. All eyes locked onto the scene: Walter, a towering figure of righteous fury, and two impostors, their authority unraveling under the weight of his glare. The air crackled with tension, a storm about to break. "These men," Walter bellowed, his voice a clarion call, "invaded my home, laid hands on my granddaughter, and dared to call it law. They're frauds, liars hiding behind fake badges." He released them, and they stumbled forward, their bravado shattered. The crowd erupted in murmurs, a mix of shock and outrage. Walter's gaze zeroed in on the HOA president, Mr. Grayson, whose sweaty brow and darting eyes betrayed a man caught in a lie. Had he known? Had he enabled this? The room became a powder keg. Mrs. Delaney, a quiet retiree, stood, her voice quaking as she recounted how these enforcers had threatened her over her gardens. Non-compliant roses. Mr. Torres, a grizzled ex-Marine, slammed his fist on the table, describing their demand to dismantle his wheelchair ramp a violation they couldn't justify. A young couple, the Wilsons, spoke of a chilling encounter where these men demanded a permit for their daughter's chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Each story, a spark in the growing blaze, exposed a pattern of intimidation that had festered in the shadows. The HOA, meant to protect, had become a tool for oppression, or worse, a front for something darker. Mr. Grayson stammered, his claims of ignorance crumbling under the community's collective scorn. "This is a misunderstanding," he pleaded, but the room drowned him out. Voices rose, raw and unfiltered, as neighbors found their courage. The meeting, once a dull ritual, transformed into a tribunal. Walter stood at its heart, his presence a beacon of defiance. "This isn't just about my granddaughter," he said, his voice steady but searing. "It's about every one of you who's been bullied, silenced, or shamed by these cowards. We end this now." The aftermath was seismic. The imposters were hauled away by real police, their fake badges confiscated, their scheme exposed as a racket to extort and control. Rumors swirled: were they rogue operatives? Or had the HOA's leadership been complicit? Mr. Grayson resigned in disgrace, his denials ringing hollow. The neighborhood, once fractured by fear, forged a new bond. Porches that had been silent now hummed with conversations about vigilance and unity. For Sophie, the ordeal was a crucible, her tearful eyes now bright with the knowledge that her grandfather's courage had shielded her and taught her to stand tall. But the story didn't end there. Whispers of similar incidents in nearby towns sparked debates. How many communities were under siege by such frauds? Walter's stand became a rallying cry, a controversial spark that challenged the very notion of authority. Some called him a hero, a grandfather who'd turned the tables on tyranny. Others whispered he'd gone too far, his physical confrontation a step beyond reason. The truth, raw and unyielding, hung in the air. Walter Caldwell had exposed a rot that ran deeper than one neighborhood, and in doing so, he'd ignited a fire that wouldn't soon die. As Sophie played once more, her laughter a defiant hymn, Walter watched from the porch, knowing the battle for justice was far from over.